if we talk, we talk to people now about low carb, healthy fat. And I'm glad you use that term, because I think I much prefer the term low carb, healthy fat rather than high fat, and not just low carb, but low carb, healthy fat. And, I call that evolution of diet. You go from the SAD, everyone eating crap food. They think, okay, we'll move to the standard, the food pyramid or the food plate or whatever. There are some that decide to go vegan, which is fine because they've got an interest in their own health, but ultimately they'll be nutrient deficient, and they'll come back, and everyone moves towards low carb, healthy fat, like real food. Then you've got those hardcorers that want to go to keto, and then you've got a group that go hardcore onto carnivore.
Yeah.
And everyone's got different reasons, for doing that. Belinda lost a finger as a kid, and so she's done a lot of camera work as a photographer with her other finger, and it's become a bit arthritic after decades. Anyway, she's just gone, she said, okay, I want to do hardcore carnivore. I'm letting the cat out of the bag. So she did that because we've been LCHF for a long, long time, keto.
Yeah.
She said, I'm going to go carnivore. I'm just going to drop all of those.
Wow. What did she notice? Is it working?
Yeah, everything got better within about 4 or 5 days. Yeah. But so there's someone who's actually been, eating well, but found even added benefit for just going carnivore.
Yeah. I was just thinking in, the beginning of this discussion where you're talking about trying to get sugar out of the diets for people's joints. If you're not familiar with low carbohydrate, keto, carnivore, you would think that is a little wild. That must be hyperbole. That must be a little over the top. He's exaggerating. But once you've been in this world for a while, especially the carnivore world, you're like, oh yeah, absolutely. All of that makes perfect sense. I've seen it over and over and over. All of these many conditions improve when we start eating the right food. It's amazing that she did the same thing and noticed within days that she was feeling better.
And she wasn't high carb. And if people want to know the science behind that, I actually did a talk on that. It's on YouTube, Carbohydrate, the Dose is the Poison. And I've given that in a few forums, but it is on YouTube. And because we're talking low carb, I thought, okay, I get into trouble anyway. So I thought, actually, I'll go and say, let's try and define what is the toxic dose. Okay, if you're realistically saying, okay, everyone's going around, oh, carbs are bad. I'm going to look and see, okay, what dose does it become poison? Because the dose is the poison.
Yeah.
So by definition, I said, okay, carbohydrate, when does it have a negative impact on the body? And when it has a negative impact on the body, then it's toxic. So I made an academic argument. It's been seen hundreds of thousands of times. I made an academic argument for 4 grams or 1 teaspoon of glucose being toxic.
That's the dose.
That's the dose, because at that dose, and I'll come back to the joints in a second, it starts, if you change your philosophy on it, the body does everything in its power to get glucose out of the bloodstream. Because every time the blood glucose goes up, it causes damage. First, it causes damage to the glycocalyx, which is the lining of every blood vessel, which allows the red cells and to move through, even right through the capillaries. That glycocalyx is critical. Raised blood glucose gets damaged. People with diabetes, chronically thin glycocalyx, which is a bit like the equivalent of the gut lining. If you actually get lots of tight junction damage, then you get a whole lot of inflammation because proteins get through the gut wall. But the same thing actually happens with the blood vessel wall. And the glycocalyx is the biggest organ in the body. It's bigger than the skin. It's massive. And then, so therefore, the other thing is I often talk about the Maillard reaction. I think we talked about that in the past, that browning of food. So that's, in fact, the Maillard reaction is when glucose in food, so if you get a piece of bread and you put it in the toaster, under the effect of heat, the glucose combines with the protein. It's a glycation of protein and it goes brown. Well, the same thing happens in our tissue. When your blood glucose goes up, your tissue glucose goes up. And then under the effect of body heat, we're effectively getting the Maillard reaction. We're effectively getting toasting of our brain, our kidneys, our eyes. Every organ of the body gets toasted when your blood glucose goes up. So the body has this incredible mechanism to get rid of glucose out of the bloodstream. It's called insulin. The blood glucose goes up, trigger, straight, bang, let's get the insulin on board and actually get it out of the bloodstream. And it pushes it into the tissues. Now, insulin is great for actually getting glucose out of the bloodstream. and putting it into fat storage, which is great because in nature, when you actually get access to glucose or carbohydrate, which is effectively only fruit and honey in season, there's no beehives that are active around your place at the moment.
No, there's not.
And there's no fruit on the trees. And the only other natural source of carbohydrate is breast milk. So those sources there, your body produces insulin, turns it into fat for storage. But the other troublesome thing about insulin is it's also a growth hormone. So it's a major growth hormone for cancer. So we're living in this society now, which is just getting carbohydrate all the time, high insulin states, then insulin resistant. But that high insulin state is probably a major driver of cancer. I'm not saying it's the cause of cancer. We can talk about that from an inflammation point of view, but a driver of cancer, an ongoing cancer, is actually insulin. So I'd like to think everyone who's got cancer goes into a low insulin environment. I'm not saying it's going to cure cancer, but at least stop stimulating it and allow the body's T cells. So, and things like, fructose gets turned into alcohol in the liver. Alcohol is an inhibitor of T cell function. T cells are the first line of defense against viruses. And it's also the first major way effect of the T killer cells in cancer management. So we put people in these high sugar environments with cancer or COVID, and we're inhibiting our own immunity to actually settling them down. So the insulin, and the third thing which insulin does, which actually came out of China in 2020. So everyone blames, COVID for and Wuhan 2020, but the great research that came out of there, and I've talked about it, but it didn't come out of a low carb environment because they looked at insulin and osteoarthritis of the knee. So insulin actually stimulates the synoviocytes in the knee, which are the inflammatory cells, to make the arthritis worse. Wow. So if you drop the insulin dose, the inflammation settles. If you raise the insulin, the inflammation gets worse. So in a practical term, if you actually put people in a low insulin environment with their osteoarthritis of the knee, their knee pain gets better. And in a practical term, in a keto world, in a carnivore world, we see that all the time. But if you actually get down to the tissue level and look inside the cartilage of the knee, the cartilage is made up of a whole lot of proteins and things called glucosaminoglycans, which are combinations of sugars, carbohydrate, proteins. The end products of glucose metabolism, that Maillard reaction, that glycation of proteins and the damage is actually there in cartilage. You do not find the end products of protein damage in cartilage. You do not find the end products of fat metabolism in cartilage. You only find the end products of glucose metabolism. And if you look at pre-agricultural skeletons, I've got a friend who's right into this stuff. And if you look at pre-agricultural revolution, their skeletons, very low rates of arthritis. So if you go to those archaeologists, those museums, they'll say, oh, that's pre-agricultural revolution, that's post-agricultural revolution. They literally look at it. They can just see it from the joints. See it from the teeth. That early agricultural revolution, no teeth because they tried mashing. It wasn't until they then had to start processing it by grinding it. And with that advent, then we started then getting the inflammation. You can arguably track osteoarthritis to the migration of the potato from South America through to Europe and then around the rest of the world. Osteoarthritis tracked the potato.
Wow, so fascinating.
So, and then again, when you come to the tendon damage in the shoulder, we talked about that earlier, the end products of glucose metabolism are in tendons as well. So people with rotator cuff troubles, Achilles tendonitis, the classics, even wrist tendonitis, even carpal tunnel syndrome, the problems with the hands, it's all just inflammation, glucose metabolism, side effects. So again, this all comes back to carbohydrate, the dose is the poison. So we're seeing changes at a tissue, at a blood vessel lining level. We're seeing it at a tissue level. We're seeing it at a joint level. We're seeing it at a tendon level. We're seeing it at an insulin driving level. So to me, and we start provoking that insulin response at 4 grams.
Wow.
So that's how I came up with the number. So what's fascinating is people may not like it, but they haven't actually argued against it. It's what was that Al Gore's message, an inconvenient truth. Whether or not he was right or wrong, that's I've just opened up Pandora's box off to the
exactly.
side there. Whoa,
yeah,
let's not go there.
but
it is an inconvenient truth. Here is glucose metabolism. I'm not making this stuff. That talk's all completely referenced. People can go, it's just biochemistry. And it's biochemistry that almost the entire medical profession has overlooked. Our degrees are based in biochemistry. This isn't, I keep talking about the Krebs cycle. This is the basic biochemistry I'm talking about. This isn't the fine print in the biochemistry textbook. This is the basic. Our bodies, our cells, our mitochondria will survive just as happily on protein, fats, and as well as carbohydrate, as long as you're getting the micronutrients in.
Yeah.
The micronutrients are going to be complete. The proteins are going to be complete. The healthy fats are going to be complete if they're animal-based.
Yeah.
They'll be incomplete if they're plant-based.
That's right.
And again, I'm sorry if I'm going to upset the plant-based system, culture, propaganda, but that's it. You get complete healthy fats, proteins, micronutrients, and all the energy requirements you get from an animal-based diet.
Yeah.
And I'm not I'm not about factory farming. Let's talk about a symbiotic, respectful relationship, care for our animals, start cropping, start using our land better, because we've got all these grasslands which are actually fire risks here in Australia. There's a big push from, a big push. The meat lobby here in Australia have an ongoing offer to farm through our national forests their cattle. Not over farm them, not overgraze them, just actually let them graze through, graze the undergrowth, decrease the fire risk. We do the same thing in California. You guys, we see on the news, California's on fire again.
Yeah.
You just get the animals in there, let them graze down. And everyone will say, that's not the natural. Okay, put a few bison back in there. I don't care how you do it.
That's right.
Start grazing it in a more respectful, I'll use the term regenerative agriculture way. And we can start actually, and there's the amount of arable land on the planet, because that's another pet topic of mine, is the environmental aspect. Because if people say, you want to talk about animal-based, you're bad for the environment. Well, actually, no, we're not. The biggest agricultural export in the world is topsoil related to our farming practices, and the farming practice is plant-based. Whether or not we're arguing plant-based, for the people or arguably for feedlot, we've got this opportunity to move our farming practices back into that marginal grasslands, which, the mountain slopes, the hilltops, which can't be farmed and ploughed. Let's actually think about that in a better way.
Yeah.
We've got all these answers. It's just all completely confounded by propaganda.